Rain poured like 1,000 needles over the city, tracing silver lines down the tall glass windows of the rehabilitation center. Inside, Ethan Cole sat by the window in his wheelchair, watching people rush by, umbrellas opening like dark flowers, shoes splashing through puddles, laughter echoing faintly beyond the glass. Once, he would have been out there, the man everyone moved aside for, the billionaire who owned half the skyline. Now, his world was 10 steps wide, and his legs were silent beneath the blanket. A car horn outside startled him, and for a moment he could almost feel the weight of the steering wheel again. Almost. Then the numbness reminded him, his last drive had ended with twisted metal and a life rewritten. "Mr. Cole," a soft voice called behind him. He turned. A young woman in scrubs stood at the doorway, damp from the rain. "I'm Lily, your new therapist." She smiled, the kind that tried to reach the broken corners of a room. He nodded stiffly. "You're late." "Traffic," she said, walking closer. "You're early." He didn't reply. His eyes followed her reflection in the window, small, quick, alive. She unpacked her files and kneeled beside his chair, studying the lifeless legs he hated anyone to look at. "We'll start slow," she murmured. "I'm not interested in starting," he said coldly. "Just in ending this routine." Her smile didn't falter. "Good. Then let's end the pity first." That single line cut through the silence. For the first time in weeks, he looked directly at someone instead of through them. Outside, thunder rolled, a low growl echoing through the glass as if the sky itself had felt the tension. Lily placed her notebook on his lap gently, not asking permission. "You may have lost movement, Mr. Cole," she said, "but I don't think you've lost your fight." He wanted to tell her she was wrong. That the fire had gone out months ago. That he didn't fight anymore, he just endured. But her words lingered, unwanted, in the quiet of his chest. She stood and walked toward the door. "I'll see you tomorrow. And try not to stare at the rain too long, it'll start staring back." When she left, Ethan's reflection looked different somehow. Not stronger. Just less invisible. He wheeled himself back to the window, staring at the city that once belonged to him. His hands still worked, strong, steady, disciplined. They were the only part of him the accident hadn't stolen. And tonight, as he gripped the armrests tighter, he realized something strange. He wanted to show that woman he wasn't finished yet. But why did her voice stay in his head longer than the sound of his own thoughts? The rain eased, turning into a soft mist that painted the city in gold reflections. Somewhere inside that quiet, Ethan whispered to the empty room, "End the pity, eh? Let's see if you mean it, Lily." For the first time in months, he didn't feel like sleeping. He felt like proving someone wrong. "Before we dive deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me how far a single story can travel, from one broken heart to another still learning to beat. Drop your city in the comments, let's see how wide kindness still spreads." Globe showing Europe, Africa. The next morning would bring pain, resistance, and something he hadn't felt in a long time, a reason to wake up. When Lily returned, she didn't greet him with sympathy. She tossed a towel onto his lap and said, "We're going outside." He frowned. "Outside? I'm not." "Exactly," she cut in. "You're not. But we're changing that today." He stared at her, this woman who looked like she'd never met fear in her life. He almost laughed. "You have no idea who I am." She met his eyes, calm and unshaken. "A man who hates pity. That's enough for me to start." The hallway smelled of disinfectant and rain. Patients turned as they passed, some whispering, others smiling politely. Ethan hated that look, the one that said how sad. But Lily didn't slow down. She pushed his chair as if she were walking with him, not for him. When they reached the doors, sunlight broke through the clouds. It hit his face like warmth he'd forgotten existed. He closed his eyes and breathed. And for a brief moment, he didn't feel helpless. The sunlight felt heavier than he remembered. It clung to his skin like an unfamiliar warmth, almost intrusive after months of artificial light and sterile rooms. Ethan blinked against it, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair as if they might keep him from floating away. Lily stood beside him, arms crossed, her ponytail catching the morning breeze. "Feels different, doesn't it?" He didn't answer. His eyes drifted across the garden. The path curved gently between flowerbeds, and the scent of wet earth rose like something sacred. People walked, some limping, some pushing walkers. None of them looked at him with pity. They were too busy fighting their own battles. "Why bring me here?" he finally asked. "Because healing doesn't happen inside walls," she said simply. "And because I needed to see what you do when no one's holding you up." He looked down at his hands, veins standing out against his pale skin. "I don't need anyone to hold me up." Lily smiled faintly. "Then prove it." She placed a small rubber ball in his lap. "Grip. Squeeze. Release. 100 times." He raised a brow. "That's it." "That's everything," she said. "You've been sitting still for 6 months, Ethan. Start with what still listens to you." He stared at the ball, small, meaningless. But the challenge in her tone scraped something raw inside him. His fingers curled. The muscles trembled, then obeyed. Once, twice, again. Each movement felt like dragging a ghost out of his bones. Lily didn't speak. She just watched, steady, patient. Minutes turned into something slower. The rhythm of squeeze and release matched the beat of his heart, the one he thought had grown quiet. He looked up, breath uneven. "Happy now?" "Proud," she corrected softly. That word hit him harder than it should have. Proud. No one had said that to him since before the accident. His father hadn't. His board hadn't. Not even the doctors. He swallowed, unsure why his throat felt tight. "You really think this matters?" "It does," she said. "Because you cared enough to try." He looked away quickly, embarrassed by the sting behind his eyes. "You're good at this manipulation thing." She chuckled. Therapy, not manipulation. Though sometimes they looked the same. For the first time, he almost smiled. "If you were there in that moment, what would you have done? Be honest, would you push someone like Ethan to fight again, or let them fade quietly? If words fail you, just hit like to prove compassion still matters." Red heart hash. Days blurred into weeks. Every morning, Lily came with a new task, small, deliberate tortures dressed as exercises. Every evening, Ethan found himself waiting for her voice to echo down the hall again. They argued often. He resisted, she provoked. He cursed, she laughed. Somewhere in that friction, his silence began to crack. One afternoon, she found him by the piano in the therapy lounge. Dust covered the keys like frost. "You play?" she asked. "Used to." "Then play again." He hesitated. His hands hovered above the ivory surface. "I can't feel the pedals." "Then feel the music instead." Her words shouldn't have meant anything. But when he pressed the first note, the sound filled the room with something painfully alive. The vibrations ran through his fingertips and up his arms like electricity. He played slow, broken, uneven. But he played. Lily stood beside him, eyes soft. "See? Still a man of rhythm." He glanced up. "You're really not good at letting people give up, are you? Not when they still have a heartbeat." That night, Ethan dreamt for the first time in months. He was walking, not perfectly, not easily, but walking. And beside him, someone was laughing. He didn't see her face, but he knew that laugh. When he woke, his pillow was damp. Whether from sweat or tears, he didn't check. He just stared at his hands again and whispered, "Maybe it's time." And from that day on, he began counting victories, not in money, but in motion. One more lift. One more note. One more reason to wake up. By the third month, Ethan's hands no longer trembled when he reached for the wheels. He'd learned how to move again, not his legs, but his world. Every small push down the corridor felt like taking back a fraction of the man he used to be. Lily noticed every detail, even the ones he didn't. When he pretended not to care, she'd smirk. When he secretly tried harder, she'd somehow always appear, saying nothing, just watching with that quiet certainty that both comforted and annoyed him. That morning, she found him in the courtyard again. The sunlight was warm, the air carrying the scent of coffee from the nearby cafe. Ethan had positioned himself near the fountain, his tablet resting on his lap. "You're working again," she said, noticing the open business reports on his screen. "Trying," he replied, not looking up. "They're replacing me on the board." She leaned on the bench edge. "And how do you feel about that?" He gave a dry laugh. "I feel like I deserve it. No one wants a CEO who can't stand in front of his own employees." Lily's gaze softened. "You built that company with your mind, not your legs." He turned toward her. "You don't understand. The world doesn't respect men who look weak." She studied him for a moment, then knelt beside his chair. "Maybe. But they'll never forget the ones who rise again." Her words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan looked away quickly, afraid she'd see the flicker of emotion on his face. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded newspaper. "By the way, they published your speech from last year. The one you gave before the accident." He frowned. "Why would I want to read that?" "Because the man who said those words is still here," she said. "You just stopped listening to him." Ethan's eyes scanned the headline, "Strength is the will to begin again." His own quote, once proud, now haunting. He felt a lump form in his throat. Lily rose to leave, her voice softer now. "You're not helpless, Ethan. You're healing. Stop confusing the two." He didn't reply, not then. But that night, those words played again and again in his mind, "Stop confusing the two." He realized, somewhere deep beneath the pride and bitterness, she was right. He wasn't broken. Just unfinished. Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Write yes and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think. Globe showing Europe, Africa. The next few days, Ethan became unpredictable. He'd push himself harder, longer, refusing rest. Lily would walk in to find him already sweating, jaw clenched, determination replacing the old emptiness. But there were moments, too, when he'd stare at the window for minutes, as if fighting a battle only he could see. On one of those days, Lily brought him a small box. "What's this?" he asked. She smiled. "Something from my brother. He's a mechanic. Said it might help." Inside was a modified lever, simple, metal, handmade. "He designed it for your chair. Makes the movement smoother." Ethan blinked. "He doesn't even know me." "He doesn't need to," she said. "He knows you're trying." That simple gesture hit deeper than he expected. No charity. No pity. Just kindness, quiet, practical, human. He exhaled, almost smiling. "You people really don't know how to quit, do you?" "Not when it comes to fixing things worth saving," she replied softly. That night, Ethan sat by the window again, the city lights flickering like stars fallen to the streets below. He realized for the first time that maybe he wasn't meant to be the man he was before. Maybe he was meant to become someone different, someone stronger in a quieter way. And when he finally closed his eyes, he wasn't thinking about what he lost. He was thinking about what he might still give. Morning light spilled through the blinds, painting soft gold lines across the room. Ethan was already awake, staring at the ceiling as the hum of the building filled the silence. For weeks, he'd been pushing harder than any schedule required, early exercises, extended sessions, late-night reading about nerve recovery. The ache in his shoulders was proof he was still alive. When Lily walked in, he was balancing a small dumbbell in each hand. Sweat glistened across his temples, his jaw set with focus. "You're early," she said, surprised. He smirked faintly. "You said healing doesn't wait. Looks like you actually listened." She walked around him, checking posture, form, resistance. Every move he made was stubborn, imperfect, but real. After the session, she sat beside him on the bench near the therapy room window. The city stretched beyond the glass, busy, careless, alive. "Do you ever go out there?" he asked suddenly. Lily shook her head. "Not often. Most of my world lives in here." "Then we're both trapped," he muttered. She smiled gently. "Difference is, I chose this prison." He turned to look at her, truly look, and for the first time, noticed the faint tiredness beneath her smile, the shadow of someone who carried other people's pain every day. "You really believe people can change?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "I think they remember who they were before life got loud." Her words sank into him like quiet truth. Ethan wheeled forward to the mirror nearby, staring at his reflection. His hair was shorter now, his shoulders leaner, his eyes less empty. "I almost forgot that version," he said softly. Lily stepped closer. "Then let's reintroduce you to him." That afternoon, she brought out something new, a set of parallel bars. He froze. "You want me to stand?" "Not yet. Just to feel," she said. He gripped the cold metal. The weight of his body pressed into his arms, the silent legs dragging behind him like memories that refused to wake. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His jaw tightened, but his arms locked, strong, trembling, unyielding. "Stop," she said, noticing the strain. He shook his head. "No. Ethan. No." His voice cracked, raw and sharp. "I'm tired of stopping." He tried again, his face twisting with effort. For a second, his knees shifted, not much, but enough to make Lily gasp softly. He sank back down, chest heaving. The room went silent except for his breath. Lily knelt, her eyes bright with something between pride and disbelief. "You moved." He laughed breathlessly. "You sure it wasn't the floor shaking?" She grinned. "Maybe, but I'll take it." For the first time, they both laughed, not the forced kind, but the real, messy one that comes when pain briefly forgets itself. "Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight." Dizzy. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone, replaying the moment. His muscles still burned, but beneath the pain was something unfamiliar, pride. He looked at his hands, calloused now, and whispered, "She was right. I'm not helpless." The city lights glowed beyond his window, and for once, he didn't feel outside of it. He was part of it again, even from a distance. When Lily stopped by his door to check on him, he pretended to be asleep. But she lingered, her shadow stretching across the floor. "Good work today, Ethan," she whispered. "You did more than you think." He waited until she left before exhaling, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. In the dark, he reached for his tablet. He opened the email he'd ignored for weeks, an invitation from his company's foundation. Guest speaker needed for our annual charity event. Theme, the power of starting over. He stared at it for a long moment, then typed 2 words. "I'll attend." The next day, Lily walked in to find him dressed differently, clean shirt, trimmed hair, confidence stitched back into his posture. "What's this?" she asked, amused. "Business," he said quietly. "Or maybe, redemption." She smiled. "Then let's make sure you stand tall when you go." And he meant it, he would. The auditorium shimmered with gold light, the kind that made everything look important. Rows of suits and evening gowns filled the room, cameras flashing, conversations humming like restless bees. Ethan sat near the stage, fingers pressed against the wheels of his chair, his reflection staring back from the polished floor. Lily stood beside him, clipboard in hand, dressed simply yet elegant. She leaned close and whispered, "You sure about this?" He exhaled slowly. "I built this company to inspire people. Maybe it's time I prove I still can." When the host called his name, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ethan Cole." The applause echoed like thunder. He rolled forward, spotlight wrapping him in a halo of brightness. The microphone stood tall before him, mocking his seated form. For a second, the noise of the crowd vanished. He could hear only his breath and the slow rhythm of his heart. He looked out over the sea of faces. Some smiled politely. Others looked at him with quiet pity. And somewhere in the front row, Lily's gaze met his, steady, fierce, unflinching. That was enough. He reached forward, gripping the sides of the chair, feeling the cold metal dig into his palms. Then, in one motion, painful, uneven, trembling, he pushed himself upward. His legs shook like breaking glass. The world seemed to stop. He stood. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't long. But it was his. A gasp rippled through the audience. Some rose instinctively to their feet. Ethan held onto the lectern, every muscle screaming, and began to speak. "A year ago, I thought my story ended on a highway. I thought paralysis meant punishment, that my worth stopped where my movement did. But I was wrong. Strength, he paused, his voice cracking, isn't about walking. It's about standing, even when everything tells you not to. He looked at Lily again. She nodded once, tears glinting in her eyes. I was surrounded by machines, doctors, silence, and one woman who refused to let me disappear. She taught me that healing isn't about getting back what you lost, it's about discovering what still works. The crowd erupted in applause, but Ethan barely heard it. All he saw was Lily's proud smile, and all he felt was the weight of his own body, standing, breathing, alive. When he sat back down, the room was on its feet. Flashbulbs went off like tiny stars. Lily walked up quietly, touching his shoulder. You did it. He managed a laugh. We did. If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart hash. Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. The next morning, the video of his speech went viral. Paralyzed Billionaire stands again flooded headlines and feeds. Thousands commented, people in wheelchairs, parents of accident survivors, strangers who simply needed hope. Ethan scrolled through the messages, his throat tightening as he read. You made me believe again. I started therapy today because of you. My son watched your speech 10 times. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. For once, his name wasn't tied to wealth or scandal, it was tied to strength. Later that day, Lily came to his room, holding her phone up. You're trending, Mr. Cole. He smiled. You say that like I didn't plan it. She laughed softly. Maybe I underestimated your PR skills. He reached for his chair's wheels, rolling closer to the window. Lily, I've spent my life proving I could build empires. But you, he paused, looking back at her, you helped me rebuild myself. She hesitated, her smile fading into something fragile. You did the work. I just reminded you where to look. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize the shape of the person who changed everything without asking for credit. Then quietly, he said, You're wrong. Her brows furrowed. About what? He smiled faintly. About not going out there. The world could use someone like you. She looked away, flustered. We're not talking about me, Ethan. Maybe we should, he said softly. For a brief second, she didn't move. Then her lips curved into a smile she tried to hide. Finish your therapy first, Mr. Cole. Then we'll talk about my world. He chuckled. Deal. And when she left the room, he realized something simple yet profound. She hadn't just healed his body. She'd made him want to live again. The next few weeks blurred into sunlight and movement, physical therapy sessions, interviews, letters from strangers. Ethan's name had become a symbol, but the fame that once thrilled him now felt hollow. Every time he saw his speech replayed on screens, all he could think about was Lily's quiet smile in the front row. One morning, she didn't show up. He waited through the first hour of his session, staring at the door. Then the second. By noon, the clock seemed to tick louder than his heartbeat. When she finally arrived, her scrubs were wrinkled, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Sorry, she whispered. The hospital needed me last night. Emergency case. Ethan could tell she was hiding something. You okay? She nodded too quickly. Let's just get started. But as the hours passed, her hands shook when she adjusted the straps, her focus frayed. When she tried to help him stand, her grip faltered, and for the first time since he'd met her, Lily looked lost. Stop, he said gently. What's going on? She tried to smile but her voice cracked. It's nothing. Lily. Her shoulders trembled. My brother, the one who built that lever for you, he didn't make it. Car crash. The room fell silent. The fluorescent light hummed above them, merciless and cold. Ethan froze. For a moment, words wouldn't come. When? Last night, she whispered. They called me right after midnight. He stared at her, the woman who'd carried his pain for months, now holding her own with trembling hands. Slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing hers. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Don't. You need your strength. He tightened his grip. Then let me use it for you, Just this once. Her composure cracked, tears slid down her cheeks. Ethan had never seen her cry, not once, not even when he'd shouted at her in frustration. Now, he understood the kind of courage it took to keep everyone else standing while your world fell apart. Without thinking, he lifted her hand to his lips and whispered, "You taught me how to fight pain. Now let me return the favor." She looked at him, shocked, broken, grateful, and then collapsed into his arms, her sobs muffled against his chest. They stayed that way for a long time. Two people who had taught each other strength, finally admitting how fragile they both still were. Be honest, could you forgive after what they did? Type forgive if you could, or never if it would break you too deeply. Broken heart. That night, the center was quiet. Lily sat by the window in the therapy room, staring at the city lights. Ethan rolled in silently, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this." She smiled weakly. "You shouldn't be here. I could say the same to you." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of rain against glass filling the air. "I used to tell my brother everything," she whispered. "Every patient, every victory. He'd always say, 'One day, someone's going to heal you, Lily.' I thought it was a joke." Ethan's voice was quiet. Maybe he wasn't wrong. She looked at him then, really looked, and the sadness in her eyes shifted into something softer. "I should go home," she murmured. He nodded. "I'll be here tomorrow." As she walked away, he called out softly, "Lily?" She turned. He smiled faintly. "You were never helpless either." Her lips trembled. "Good night, Ethan." When she left, he stared at the rain outside, realizing something painful and pure. Love wasn't just about who lifted you. It was about who stayed when the weight got too heavy to carry alone. And tonight, even in the emptiness, he knew he'd stand again. For her. The next morning came slower than usual. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a sky washed clean, the kind of pale blue that felt like forgiveness itself. Ethan woke early, restless. He hadn't seen Lily since she walked away last night, and the silence she left behind echoed louder than the applause he'd ever received. He spent the morning working his arms until they burned, each lift sharper, heavier, almost desperate. He didn't want to think, but every thought led back to her. By noon, a soft knock came at his door. He turned, expecting a nurse, but there she was, hair loosely tied, eyes swollen from crying, holding a single white envelope. "I came to say goodbye," she whispered. He froze. "Goodbye?" "I need time," she said, voice trembling. "They offered me a break. A few weeks off. I thought I'd visit my parents, clear my head." He swallowed hard. "You deserve that." She stepped closer. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I saw your speech again last night. My brother would have loved it. He believed in people like you. People who fall but keep fighting anyway." Ethan's chest tightened. "Then maybe you should stay long enough to see what happens next." She smiled faintly. "I already have. You're walking again, Ethan, maybe not with your legs yet, but definitely with your soul." He didn't know what to say. The truth was, she had become the pulse in his recovery, and now that pulse was leaving. "Will you come back?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'll be cheering for you, wherever I am." Her fingers brushed his hand for a fleeting second, a touch soft enough to break him. Then she turned and walked away. Ethan stared at the empty doorway long after she'd gone. He wanted to chase her, but all he could do was grip the wheels and whisper, "Then I'll make sure there's something worth coming back to." If you believe love still wins, comment in. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. Sun with small cloud hash. 2 weeks passed. The center felt emptier without her voice, her laughter echoing through the halls. But instead of breaking, Ethan grew sharper, fueled by something new. He doubled his therapy hours. When his arms failed, he used resistance bands. When pain screamed through his body, he screamed louder. Every drop of sweat was a promise that one day he'd meet her again, not as a patient, but as a man. One morning, during a solo session, the therapist monitoring him walked away for a call. Ethan was left alone, gripping the parallel bars that had once mocked him. His arms quivered, breath shallow, muscles burning. "Come on," he whispered to himself. "One more try." He shifted his weight forward, every nerve in his legs protesting, his body trembling like it was on fire. But then, something. A spark. A twitch. A memory of motion. He gasped. It wasn't much, just 1 second of balance before gravity dragged him back into the chair, but it was real. He laughed, breathless and wild. "Did you see that?" he shouted toward the empty hallway. "I moved." No one answered, but he didn't need them to. He felt it, the miracle of small victories. When Lily returned weeks later, the first thing she saw was him standing between those same bars, sweating, trembling, but upright. Their eyes met. No words. Just tears, disbelief, pride. He managed to smile. "Told you I'd make it worth coming back to." Lily's lips trembled as she whispered, "You did." And for the first time, she wasn't the one keeping him standing. He was. When Lily stepped fully into the room, she couldn't move for a moment. Ethan stood there, not perfectly, not easily, but standing. His knuckles white on the bars, sweat running down his temples, chest rising and falling with the stubborn rhythm of a man who'd refused to give up. Tears blurred her eyes as she whispered, "How long have you been able to?" 3 days, he said between breaths. "I wanted to surprise you." She covered her mouth, trying to hide a sob that slipped free anyway. Ethan smiled weakly. "You always said healing isn't about getting back what's gone. You were right. It's about building something new, something stronger." She walked toward him slowly, her voice shaking. "You did it, Ethan. You really did it." He met her gaze. "No. We did it." He released the bars, just for a heartbeat, trusting his own balance, and her. She stepped forward instinctively, her hands ready if he fell. But he didn't. He simply stood there, inches from her, eyes searching hers with a quiet intensity. "You told me once I was confusing being helpless with being human. You were right about that too." Lily smiled through her tears. "And what do you think now?" "I think," he hesitated, then laughed softly, shaking his head. "I think I can finally handle you." The words hung between them, playful, emotional, full of everything left unsaid. Lily's hand trembled as she reached out to touch his cheek. "You already have." Outside, the wind brushed through the garden trees, the fountain whispering softly in the background, the same place where they'd first begun. He looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. "You gave me my life back, Lily. And I don't know how to repay that." "By living it," she said. "Every day. For both of us." They stood there in silence, two survivors stitched together by shared pain and patience. For Ethan, it wasn't about walking anymore. It was about standing, for gratitude, for love, for the strength she believed he had all along. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind. One click can be your way of saying, "I felt you." Red Heart Hash. That evening, Ethan rolled himself to the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered with familiar lights, but this time, he didn't see what he'd lost. He saw what he'd built: resilience, purpose, a chance to love without fear. Lily joined him, their shoulders brushing. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Every day. And for once, it doesn't scare me." She laughed quietly. "Good. Because I'm not done pushing you yet." He turned toward her. "Then let's push together." Outside, the city lights flickered like stars, and the faint hum of life below sounded like applause meant only for them. Two broken people who'd found a way to stand again, not by miracle, but by choice. And as the night deepened, Ethan reached for her hand, steady, sure, alive, and whispered, "Thank you for seeing the man behind the wheelchair." Lily squeezed his fingers. "Always." The lights dimmed, the world slowed, and for the first time since the accident, Ethan Cole wasn't dreaming of who he used to be. He was living as the man he'd finally become.